Portfolio Podcast Lab.
Mindenkit üdvözlünk, ez a Portfolio heti podcastjének speciális kiadása, amit videón a Portfolio Youtube-csatornáján is közlünk. Mai interjúalanyunk a magyar származású Henry Kallan, a Library Hotel Collection luxusszálló-csoport tulajdonosa és elnöke. Kallan 1947-ben született a Felvidéken, és nem túlzás azt mondani, hogy megvalósította a klasszikus amerikai álmot. 21 évesen került New Yorkba pénz és nyelvtudás nélkül. Pincér segédként helyezkedett el, majd pedig egyre feljebb kapaszkodva a ranglétrán, majd 6 luxusszállóból álló cégcsoport tulajdonosa, mely 4 New Yorki, egy torontói és a budapesti Aria Hotelből áll. Az interjút ez utóbbi hotel tetőbárjában készítettük. Ebben a műsorban szó lesz Kallan kezdeti éveiről, apja kommunisták általi bebörtönzéséről, disszidálásának kalandos történetéről és a korai New Yorki évek kihívásairól is. Ezentúl beszélünk még karrierje felfutásáról, szállodafejlesztésekről, arról, hogy miért érezte úgy 40 évesen, hogy saját hoteleket akar, és megkérdezzük egy ügyről is, amiben nemrég több millió dolláros kártérítést kellett fizetnie a torontói hotelje egy korábbi beszállítójának. Én Forrás Dávid vagyok, a Portfolio podcast szerkesztője, ezt az interjút angolul közöljük, de pont ezért a Portfolio YouTube csatornáján is elérhetővé tesszük magyar felirattal. Mr. Kallan, welcome to our show and thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you very much for having me.
You were born in Czechoslovakia in a Hungarian-speaking family in 1947. Can you describe us how it was growing up in this post-World War times in a Hungarian-speaking family in Czechoslovakia?
Of course. Until the age of 6, I lived in a small village where my family were basically in the agricultural business. But of course, after the war, when the communistic regime became a reality, my father was forced to give up all his properties, but that was not good enough because he refused initially. Actually, he was sent to jail. So because of those circumstances, my mother and I were forced to move actually out of the village. We were not allowed to stay there or go back. So we ended up living in Bratislava. And that's where I pretty much grew up since I was 6 years old. And however, my Slovak was non-existent. I only spoke Hungarian, of course, Hungarian family. So I was forced to repeat first grade. So that's how I actually learned the language, Slovak language. And I grew up under a communistic system until the age of 20. At that time, of course, I've decided to leave the country for USA.
So I'll come to that in a minute, but now we are sitting on the rooftop bar of your hotel in Budapest. But do you have any childhood memories of the Hungarian capital? What was it like back then?
Well, very much so. As a matter of fact, I think since maybe I was a little older, maybe than 10 or 12, we had family here. My father had a sister who was living here. And I was visiting Budapest quite often, pretty much every summer. And the most vivid memory I have, how much I enjoyed getting ice cream in Budapest. And also my father was, obviously, thank God, he was released from the communistic jail after about 3.5 years when President of Czechoslovakia Gutwald gave amnesty to a lot of people. So, but he was, as I said, in the agricultural business, but part of his expertise were horses. So my recollection mostly was not just about the city, which to me was just a world capital by comparison to anything else I've seen to that time and that age, but it was a tradition. We used to go to the racetrack, pretty much, the horse races. And my most vivid memory was that I was always really surprised what a great feeling my father had for horses, because every time they were betting, it was either the number 1, number 2, or number 3, the horse came in. So I was very impressed with my father, and so that was probably one of the most vivid memories I had from coming to Budapest. And of course, it was a very different experiences growing up in Bratislava. To me, Bratislava was almost the village by comparison to Budapest.
Yeah. According to a previous article, you left Czechoslovakia for Austria in 1967 as a football player. And what is the story behind that? Because we haven't really found too much info on your football career.
Right. I mean, when I was 17, 18-year-old, I was playing for, it wasn't a professional team because in a communistic country there were no professionals, but I was on the national team for a while. But then I decided, when I graduated high school, I decided pretty much to leave Czechoslovakia. And I had a couple of my friends who left earlier. But obviously, going to school and listening to the communistic propaganda was something very different what I was hearing at home. So I guess for whatever reason, I was always dreaming, and I wasn't really happy with what was going on at the age of 17 to 20, what I heard in school, what I heard at home. And I was always wondering, and I think the curiosity was always triggered by the fact that we were not able to travel. The government pretty much controlled this. You're too young to remember, maybe.
Yeah.
But
I also have family.
Yeah, exactly. So that's pretty much what triggered my curiosity and my anxiety in many ways, that I don't want to get stuck living here without having the freedom to really maybe reach my potential, whether as an athlete or maybe as just a person who had certain ambition and dream, big. So I've decided at the time, when the opportunity came for myself and a friend of mine, we simply walked into the Austrian embassy and asked the Austrian ambassador if he could give us a visa for Austria, purely in an empty passport. Because in those days, you actually required, you needed a permission from the local government to be able to travel out, even if you're going to Bratislava, to Hungary or Yugoslavia. So, but at that time, I think we were able to go to Hungary and from Hungary to Yugoslavia. So with the empty passport, but only containing the passport only with the Austrian visa, we've decided to leave. We ended up going through Hungary. We went to Zagreb at that time, where we were hoping to take a train to Vienna. Of course, being naive and being ignorant, sometimes ignorance is a blessing, but we got on the wrong train going to Germany. As the train took off, then the conductor came and he looked at our passport. He says, "You are the wrong train if you're going to Austria." So we got off the train, came back to Zagreb, waited for the next train, of course, to go to Austria, Vienna. And as finally we took off, we got to the Austrian border, which at that time, obviously, we were very scared because we didn't know if the Yugoslavian authorities will actually allow us to go to Vienna. So what we've done is, with my friend, we jumped off the train and we ran through the borders. And of course, there were a bunch of, border patrols who ran after us, but I guess we were pretty good athletes. So we made it to the other side. And I remember so vividly, we were so nervous, but we were happy and we didn't know whether we should be crying or we should be laughing. Make the long story short, we ended up going to Vienna, where we registered. We immediately went to a police station. We reported ourselves, and simply was, I think, Friday evening. They didn't know what to do with us, so they put us in jail. So I had the privilege of spending 3 nights in jail with all the murderers and all the gangsters. And it was quite an experience. It was pretty terrifying for a 20-year-old kid. But anyway, so Monday they processed us with all the papers, and I remember we were told that we have to go to this refugee camp in, I think it was called Treiskirchen or one of those. We ended up actually staying only 10 days because, again, I was eager to get a job because we had no money. Our German was not exactly great. So after the 10 days, I came to Vienna and I got myself a job.
And how is football related to this?
Football is related in a way that after my first job, where I was working in a little factory, cutting the material for raincoats in a way, at that time, I didn't want to do the job anymore for a number of reasons. And I ended up looking for another position on Maria Hilferstrasse. It was a little store, retail store, was selling clothing and all kind of merchandise. And I was working there, but the gentleman who was the owner of the store wouldn't give me a job. He says, the business is not so good. He doesn't need anyone. Even though I spoke Hungarian, I spoke Slovak, I understood Polish, I spoke Russian. And he was getting a lot of business from these Eastern European countries. He says, unfortunately, I don't have enough business. So I offered to just give out leaflets on the street. And so he's okay, but I can't pay you, really. I said, okay, pay me based on what business I'm going to bring in. And I was so resourceful at that time for a 20-year-old guy that I find out where all the tourist buses come and park and where the trains come with all the tourists. And I made it my business to actually go and talk to the driver of the bus or the person who was the leader of the group. And I basically told them that we have great deals in the store. And if they bring the entire group to the store, that I will reward them. Mm-hmm. That's exactly what I've done. It was an incredible situation because we had so much business then. We literally had to lock the store. We were afraid that people will walk out with the merchandise. And I've done this probably for about 2-3 months. I mean, it was just, it's like in the movies. And one day I get a call from an agent who was a football agent. And he asked me if I would like to continue my football career, that he would be able to take me up to Innsbruck. And that's exactly what I've done. I ended up in Innsbruck and I was training for Wacker Innsbruck for a couple of months, hoping that maybe I can play. It was a professional league. But guess what? Those 2 months while I was practicing there and hoping to play for Wacker Innsbruck, the local boys were not very welcoming because they were concerned that maybe I'd take over somebody else's position. So finally, when I received my visa to go to America, the negative aspect of the relationship with the rest of the team actually helped me to decide to leave.
Yeah.
So I made the decision that maybe I'm not so welcomed here, even though the owner of the club said to me, he says, look, stay if you're really good. You have a great future. And I just said, I never even explained. I didn't complain that I didn't feel part of the team, so forth and so on. So I made a decision and I simply, decided to come to America.
Yeah. So you left to New York in 1968. Right. No money, no command of English. What are your earliest memories of the city?
In New York?
Yeah.
I mean, as probably every immigrant does, I was looking for my own people in the Slovak and Hungarian community. And but there were no real opportunities there. A lot of Hungarians own Hungarian restaurants. And but I actually initially ended up, again, working for a little small factory on 42nd Street. And I believe someplace around 6th Avenue. I was wrapping watches. And I did that probably for maybe 3 months. And I have a great little story there. I used to work with 2 very tall, big black gentlemen. They were very nice. They were very gracious with me, understanding I don't speak the language and so forth. So as I'm working here for a couple of weeks, I have a difficulty communicating. And but the reason I got the job, because when I was looking for a job, the timekeeper, when you have a service entrance for employees to come and go, I walked in there and I said, job. That's all I knew. And he says, what language do you speak? I said, German, Hungarian, Slovak. So he spoke to me in German. And somehow he says, the foreman upstairs is Hungarian. Why don't you go and see him? So I go up there, I speak to him, gives me a job for $1.56 an hour.
That wasn't too much even back then.
That was the minimum wage, was $56 a week. But anyway, make the long story short, I'm working there. But the cute story from that particular job is that as I was working with these two gentlemen, one day there were a bunch of Cuban ladies there. And one day over lunch, they asked me to join them. So I'm happy to try to talk to them, obviously from Cuba, communist country as well, I guess at that time. And they said to me, Henry, they called me, Henry, if anybody says to you, how are you? The appropriate answer for you to say is, none of your business. So the next morning I come to work and I think I'm an expert now. And these two black gentlemen who were always very friendly with me, very nice. Then he said, oh, good morning, Henry, how are you? And I, with a big smile, I said, none of your business. They were shocked.
Well, that's a very New York thing to do. But soon you go to work as a busboy in the hospitality industry. And if I put myself in your shoes, it seems like a logical choice as a young immigrant. But did you have any other motivations to go into the hospitality industry?
I mean, when I was in high school in Pozsony, during my summer breaks, I worked in some of the hotels, actually particularly in one hotel. And I realized that I was helping with luggage around the front office reception. And I realized that I enjoyed dealing with people. I enjoyed being helpful without having any expectations or any expectation to reward me in any way, in return by being nice and helpful. And I liked it. When I came to America, I realized that maybe I should give it a try. But why I was looking to be a busboy, because I knew that no money, no language, but I'd be dealing with the other employees and the guests. Gives me an opportunity to interact. But at the same time, I knew that I can maybe get a meal a day or two maybe. So that was very helpful. So my first job as a busboy actually was in a French restaurant called Brasserie between Park and Lexington Avenue. And I worked midnight to 7 a.m. But then after, it was just tough for me to work nights. So then I looked for a position in a hotel, and that was the Gotham Hotel, where I stayed for about a year as a busboy. Then I became a waiter. But then later I decided to set up, I have some other opportunities to really learn the business. So I ended up working at the Plaza Hotel with somebody who was Czech, helping me for an introduction. Then the next few years I ended up at the Hotel Pierre and different some really fine properties, where I became a front office manager. I was in marketing. I did any type of job. Then ultimately ended up working at the Drake Hotel, where I stayed for 4 years. It was a big corporation. And I told the general manager, I'm not leaving until I know the business better than you do. And that's exactly what I did. And after 4 years, the company had an opening for a general manager at the Warwick Hotel, which was a 540-room property right across from MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art. And at this point, I'm 27-year-old, I believe, or 28, going through different hotels, learning the business from finance, from marketing, from operations, and so forth. And this company basically feels that I'm still too young and I'm not seasoned enough. So the gentleman who was the general manager of the Drake Hotel introduced me to one of the probably most influential, wealthiest families. They happened to own the Hotel Gotham, which today is the Peninsula Hotel. And I remember very vividly, again, I'm sitting being interviewed by the owner. He looks at me and he says, Henry, you've only been 6-7 years in this country. I said, how can I put this very expensive, great asset on Fifth Avenue and 55th Street in your hands? And he says, you're too young. So I let him talk. I listened very carefully. And when he was done, my friend who was there with me tried to tell him how experienced I am and how confident I am and so forth. And he was still having doubts. And then at the end, I didn't say anything. I looked at the owner. I think his name was Mr. Goldman. I said, Mr. Goldman, you can always fire me. He looked at me. He says, kid, you have the job.
Yeah, and I'd like to go into to more business-related fields.
Of course.
So you end up being the general manager of the Warwick Hotel.
No, the Gotham Hotel.
So the Gotham Hotel, but later you become...
I left the Gotham, and the company which initially didn't give me the job at the Warwick realized what a great job I did at the Gotham. They called me up. Actually, the owner, Bob Tisch, and they offered me the Warwick.
Yeah, and this place, you start, or after being general manager, you become involved in developing hotels and resorts. How different was it in the 70s to develop these kind of businesses than what you do now? So how was the sector?
First of all, things were much less expensive. But actually the story is very simple. I ended up being at the Warwick Hotel for 4 years and running the business for the Tisch family, Lowe's Corporation, very, very big, family and entity. There are a number of companies, from insurance companies to hotels, real estate, and so forth, tobacco business, and so on. So I stayed there for 4 years, but then the Tisch family decided to sell the Warwick Hotel. Guess what? A family from Hong Kong, a Chinese family, ends up buying the hotel. It's an interesting story, but I'm not going to go into details. But I guess they liked me because I was part of the negotiating process, being helpful. One day I get a phone call after this was all settled, and I wasn't even sure that they actually made the deal. And I had breakfast with the new owner. He says, Henry, we would like you to stay. And we have all these ideas. If you show us that you can run a business very well and it's very profitable, then maybe we do something with you for develop a hotel company. So, make the long story short, the first year of operations without a major company involved, I made $1 million more in profit for the new Chinese owner as they expected. So they loved the idea because hotels are real estate, but at the same time it's cash flow and you can adjust the prices as you please. There's no limitations what you can charge if the demand is there. So we started to look at different opportunities. Paris, France, Colorado, in the Caribbean, and so forth and so on. And obviously, this was the only asset the Chinese family owned at that time. They were eager to develop other properties, and so I was fortunate enough to be involved here and apply all my experience and my, I guess, good common sense to work with them very closely. We sort of accumulated a team of people which were very helpful, but I was basically the person who was the lead person in looking for deals and helping them to develop new projects. And I think one of the places I remember vividly I was very helpful was Paris, was Seattle, Jamaica, the Caribbean, and so forth and so on. So, and I must say that I remember the defining moment for my future career to be an owner on my own took place when I was doing the deal with their lawyer in Jamaica and the Caribbean. It was a 20-year lease. And that 20-year lease involved spending about $7 million to improve the property. And obviously, we took it over as a lease position. We were not the owners. The government still kept the ownership. And we made the deal and everything seems fine. But on the way back from Jamaica, I said to the lawyer, I said, Paul, I said, I love the deal, but I would have done something a little bit different. And I didn't want to be disrespectful to you as you were finalizing the deal. But I said, may I share my idea? And he says, of course, by all means. He was a good friend of the owner. They went to Cambridge, I believe, in England, to college. So he says, what is it? I said, what troubles me is that if this is my money, we have a 20-year lease, we have to spend $7 million. But in 20 years, if the government doesn't renew the lease, somebody else will get the benefit of our $7 million. And I said, I think we should get credit against the rent we pay every year to reduce our rent, amortize the $7 million over 20 years. He says, Henry, it's a good idea. I wish you would have said something, sooner. I said, do you mind if we go back? I tell Dick Chu, the owner, I'd like to come back and try to renegotiate. He was a perfect gentleman. He says, of course. He says, be my guest. Guess what? The owner agreed. I went back and I made it happen.
Yeah.
And that was the defining moment when I realized I didn't go to college, but I think I'm smarter than the lawyers.
And you said earlier that when you turned 40, you felt like that you need to build something on your own. Why?
Because actually I stayed 8 more years with the Chinese family at the Warwick. But somehow I had this itching of trying to sort of be independent. Mm-hmm. And I was very lucky because I lived with my family actually at the Warwick Hotel. I had a duplex apartment. I had no expenses. So my only expense was sending my children to private schools. But everything else was basically I had a free life. And I was not a big spender. I mean, I don't drink, I don't smoke. I wasn't buying expensive cars or whatever. And realizing I'm an immigrant, and you always live with this fear that what if things don't work out? I mean, even if you're doing very well, you always somehow have this sense that you have to be careful. And so there were all kinds of opportunities ahead of me or in front of me, other better positions, bigger jobs, better pay. But my dream was I always had a dream to be a general manager of a beautiful hotel luxury property. Once I achieved that, now I was dreaming for the next step. Okay, can I maybe own a hotel? So I've learned basically what it takes. It takes banking relationships. It takes relationships with people who possibly at family offices who can participate and put up money, so forth and so on. So at that time, I had an outside accountant who was a pretty wealthy family, actually. Gentleman was in his 80s, but his son was a lawyer. And one day, this gentleman came to me and says, my son found a hotel on 92nd Street and Madison Avenue. And he doesn't know anything about business, but he's a lawyer. But he would love to talk to you about maybe creating a partnership for a hotel on 92nd Street and Madison Avenue, which is like 2 blocks from the Guggenheim Museum. So guess what? After going back and forth, I had this opportunity. I had enough money saved, so in case something goes wrong, maybe I can survive. I left the Warwick position, and I created a partnership with this gentleman where we developed this pretty much rundown rooming house, 92 keys, 92 rooms with a wonderful location. Became a real success.
And this was the Hotel Wells?
Correct.
And but after you sold that, and for the past 30 years, you developed your own hotel chain, the Library Hotel Collection. And you currently have 4 hotels in New York and the major one in Toronto and the Aria Hotel in Budapest. What would you say your philosophy in hospitality is? What connects all these hotels?
I mean, I always felt that I have to separate somehow, set myself apart from all the other hotels. And I was always able to relate to boutique hotel properties, which are 100, 150 rooms. So not much bigger because it's very difficult to create the ambiance and the personal service, the personal touch, and create those relationships with the clientele in really big hotels. So one of the things I also done with the Hotel Wells that I created what's the rooftop terrace, which became rather popular over there. And I realized that is something I should be doing if I have the opportunity with the rooftop to do that. But I think that my philosophy was always, and you can do that in the big properties, in a small hotel, where the perception of the value you're creating for a clientele is all about how do they feel about the value they're getting for what they pay. And I think that was always the basis of my philosophy and the approach. What type of hotel do I want to develop? That it's like anything else, when you feel good about something, you're willing to pay more. And I always said to the employees I worked with, I always tell them, look, when you go to a department store, you have a budget of $100 to buy a jacket. But you see something for $200, and you try it, and you really feel great. Then you pay for it, okay? That's how the hotel basically works. You can sleep someplace for $100, but if you walk into a place where you really feel great about it, oh, you know what? I work hard. I deserve to be here. You know what? Why not? Okay? I deserve feeling good about where I am, what I deserve, and I think the value I'm paying, I believe that it's something, I don't mind because I feel great. The staff makes me feel very special. And why do we pay any place? And somebody makes us feel special. We may not be somebody who is special, but if somebody makes you feel special, you appreciate that, you value that, and respect that.
I would come back to the size of your hotels. But first, let me ask you that in the beginning of the 2000s, you start investing in Central Europe, namely in Prague. Was it part of returning to your roots?
Yes. At that time, I developed the Library Hotel and the Hotel Giraffe. And the way I set myself apart from the other properties, in many ways, the concept. And my initial first concept was about books. I realized that people relate to sports, to films, to books, to music. And I bought the Library Hotel building, which was an office building, from a Japanese group. It was their only asset. They were selling everything at that time, 22 years ago. I think they were in trouble in New York. So I buy this building. Guess it's sitting on 41st Street of Madison Avenue. Guess what's one block away? The public library, New York Public Library, okay? And there was another little small library, 3 blocks down. Trying to remember the name. So I said to myself, I need to do a hotel with a book concept. And I knew exactly that I want every room and every floor represent different genre of books. Call it philosophy, religion, call it languages, whatever the case may be. And everybody I talked to, including my architect, everybody loved the idea. So, but how do I put it together? That was a similar issue here, where I had this vision. I wanted to do the music concepts, which I did in Prague initially first. And so I speak to my architect, and the architect says to me, Henry, my son is a stage director, theatrical stage director. So you should talk to him. He's very bright. He has a great imagination. So I had lunch with him. His name was Jordan Jacobs. I explained my idea, my vision. And he says, give me a week. I'll come back to you. He comes back to me in a week. He says, Henry, I get it. I said, what's that? He says, we use it, we do it, the whole concept, every floor and every room based on the Dewey Decimal System. Dewey Decimal System basically represents a different type of books. When you go to any library, to any place in the world, it's based on the Dewey Decimal System. Make the long story short, put the concept together, we opened the hotel. Guess what? Somebody files a lawsuit that I'm using, copying, whatever he had the copyrights to the Dewey Decimal System. And this hits all the papers. And all the librarians are very upset that this is basically a public domain. Why is this guy claiming this and that? But the beauty was I just landed in Prague, and my general manager calls me about this big lawsuit being filed against me and the hotel. And I said to him, relax. I said, we'll deal with it. But in the meantime, you're telling me it's in the New York Times, It's in Europe in every paper what this guy is doing. So that's $1 million advertising value. Make the long story short, I made a deal with this gentleman who actually had the rights to this. I gave him credit on our website. I gave him $20,000 for his favorite charity. That was the deal. In the meantime, I got $1 million or more worth of advertising for the new hotel. It was the best thing could have happened.
Okay, and so we are now sitting in the Aria Hotel in Budapest,
Yes.
Which you founded in 2015. And why did you think it was a particularly good idea to invest in the Budapest tourism industry, which was mostly famous for stag parties and low-income tourism, so these kind of things? And so why did you think it was an investment opportunity?
Well, first of all, as I said, we are a Hungarian family. Not by design, but by, we were forced to move away from the Hungarian-Slovak border, from the village to the capital of Slovakia at that time. And so I grew up there. I was always a happy kid. I was doing sports and so forth. But the Hungarian blood was always in me. Still is. My mom never learned properly Slovak or even English. Eventually, I brought them all out. So our language was at home always Hungarian. He always called me Imi because my Hungarian name is Imre. So I always related to Hungary, to Budapest. For me, growing up was the magic city, because not realizing that the communistic regime had several limitations for the potential of the Hungarian brilliant mind, because the Hungarians outside of Hungary, they do very successful. And so I was drawn in a way because of the language. I knew the language is always much easier to develop or do business in a country where you know the language. So just out of the blue, somebody came to me who was actually a partner with my existing partner here, Alexander Roth.
Uh-huh.
And at that time, Alex was not involved. It was only this gentleman. And he says, you really should go to Budapest to speak Hungarian. There's a bank building sitting there empty. Maybe you can do a hotel. So guess what? I come. As crazy I am, I always call myself a reckless optimist because I always take risks. I believe that I can handle anything. Unfortunately, it's not necessarily the case. I mean, I did, but COVID proves that I shouldn't be a reckless optimist, because just because I may have a golden touch doesn't mean that things always work out. So I come, I buy the building. It was an Israeli group. They didn't know what to do because the building was three floors, half a floor basement. It was just a wreck. Okay? Guess what? I buy it. Initially, I think the gentleman who find the building, I think he shared about 5% of the ownership, so forth, and 95%. I decided we should do something. Now I have a vision because I did Prague already, but I wanted, in the meantime, I sold my position in Prague to my partners. And I said to myself, I got to do something much more unique and much greater, more luxury level than what Prague is, even though Prague is a lovely, beautiful property. And but we didn't build a real spa over there. The rooftop is much smaller, something much more grandiose, much more luxury. So guess what? Now I look for a proper designer, because I had an architect from Italy who helped me to build a hotel in Prague. Lovely people, very brilliant. Unfortunately, Rocco Magnoli, who was my architect in Budapest, he passed away. Was a brilliant, brilliant gentleman, but his partner there was helpful for me to actually decide how I could approach the existing building. So at the end of the day, we did something very special, very unique here, but the concept of the music and how to work with the building and how to take advantage of it, I couldn't find a designer any place, in Italy, in Germany, in Czech, in any place. all of a sudden, good fortune came my way, and I met Zoli Varro.
Mm-hmm.
And after a couple of meetings, I realized that this is a young guy who gets it. I think he was brilliant. So I got very excited. I made a deal with him. We had a number of meetings and so forth and so on. Guess what? This is a collaborative effort between Zoli and myself. And of course, I also have to give credit to Peter Lucky's team, who were actually the contractors. And it was very tough. It was purely a labor of love. A lot of imagination, worked extremely hard. But I think we've created something which is probably the finest contemporary type of hotel in Europe, which nothing comes close. There are existing palaces throughout Europe, and I love those buildings, but somehow the designer or the architects missed the mark once they restored those beautiful palaces. But on the inside, I think they forget to continue with the same concept and the same sort of the sense and the feel for the property, what should represent the period when the hotel was built. So what we've done here is created something timeless, contemporary, maybe sort of classical more on the outside, but inside it's very contemporary, but very functional. And I think the most important thing in any type of development, from an architectural point of view or a design point of view, is two things. It's functionality and design. But functionality comes first. Design comes second. But when you can combine those two elements, I think you get something not only beautiful aesthetically, but also functionally. Because once you make mistakes, you pay for it forever.
Yeah. So you mentioned Alexander Roth, and you told the Wall Street Journal a few years ago that he's also a partner of yours in the Budapest.
He's the only partner. We have 50-50 partners here.
But you said that in the Toronto hotel, he invested $50 million to that development without even going to the place. Like, how did that happen?
I mean, Alex is a very unique individual. I think
he's also has Hungarian origins.
Yes, he's got a Hungarian background, Ukrainian. And I was very fortunate to meet him because he was already my partner here.
Okay.
So again, I didn't know that he may be interested in Toronto. So I approached him, and actually I don't know, maybe it was a mistake by the reporter, but actually Alex was very generous. He put up $100 million. But I also must add, don't want to sound not being humble, but I also put up 75 million and my good friend 25. So the investment was equal at the same risk, except Alex did this on his own. He put up a lot of money, and without his contribution, I could have never built the hotel in Toronto. So obviously I'm grateful to him. And without him, Toronto would have not happened. So
yeah, and the Toronto complex is much bigger.
Toronto, it's almost like a village.
Yeah.
And it's 1 million square feet.
Yeah.
Which is roughly 100,000 square meters. Not only 400 rooms. We have a sports complex, which is like 9,000 square meters. Inside tennis courts, 4 of them. You name it. I mean, it's the most premier sports complex maybe in Toronto, privately owned. And we have the U.S. Open tennis players when they play at the Rogers Center tournaments, practice there. The Raptors basketball team comes, uses the place, the hockey players, Maple Leafs organization. So it's a beautiful, beautiful property. The two developments I'm most proud of is clearly Budapest. That's my heart. But equally in many ways is Toronto, except, it's much more grand and takes, much more financially to make sure that it's a big success. But Budapest is clearly something I love to show up here and enjoy it.
Yeah, I know that we are running out of time, but I still have two topics.
No, I'm fine.
Okay, thank you. So the first is that at the end of the NHL season of the 2019-2020 season, of course, it was disrupted by COVID, and you hosted one of the bubbles where they organized the Stanley Cup. Can you provide some insights into the complexities of organizing such event at the beginning of the pandemic when we literally knew nothing about the virus?
Right. I think actually the Hotel X in Toronto is located positions a little bit outside of the core of the city center. It's about 15 minutes by taxi. But we have 9.3 acres. And we are sitting in a spot overlooking Lake Ontario. It's really an urban resort hotel. So because of the location and all the facilities we had, maybe somewhat of an isolation or isolated position, not being right in the middle of everything what may be going on. Because by government mandate, we couldn't do anything. The hotel was literally shut down. The restaurants were not open and so forth. But I guess this was an exception to the rule at that time. And so we made the deal with the Hockey Association, overall the NHL, National Hockey League, that we were, because of our position and the location, and the players were able to just stay within the property, and we reopened the restaurant operation to feed them and so forth and so on. They had the facility to work out and so forth. So it was a very unique situation, and it, I believe, lasted for a couple of months. The reality is that we were delighted to be able to do it. And obviously we were generating revenue, but that revenue did not end up making real money. But we were just pleased to do it. It was good publicity and certainly helped the reputation of the hotel. So pretty much that was it. So
yeah, another topic which I would like to talk about regarding the Hotel X in Toronto is connected to this NHL operations, is that you recently lost a litigation against a company called PNP, and the court found that you terminated their contract in bad faith, and they were awarded $7 million reliance damages plus $2 million for employees. And you know, local papers wrote that you canceled the contract to make space for another company, Harlow Entertainment, which is related to NHL's Pittsburgh franchise. Is there anything that you would do different? I understand that business is complex, so that's my question. Would you do something different now about this deal?
First of all, I see you do your homework. So everything you're saying is pretty much correct, with one exception, that I terminated that contract because they were basically very bad operators. And they were totally unprofessional. The reputation of the hotel was basically being diminished by all the problems we had, them operating the food and beverage, including the catering. So I've had a number of meetings with these people, with the ownership, and I basically shared my sentiments with them. But unfortunately, the ownership gentleman was one of those big bravado guys who thought, you know, nobody can touch him and so forth. And I tried every which way. And then simply I believed that this no longer can be tolerated. The way he was operating the business was affecting, you know, our name. I made a decision, and on that decision, something I would make again. The fact that we lost the lawsuit was just totally crazy and insane, because let me share with you how the system works in Canada. The commercial cases are decided by one person, one judge. There's no jury, there's no number of judges which are deciding and collaborating, okay? This lady, who was the decision maker as a judge for the case, we had a trial basically. She listened to everything. The other side had their chance, we did. My lawyers were absolutely convinced that we did everything correctly. But this lady was not a commercial lawyer. She was a family lawyer, but she was a bleeding heart. We were New Yorkers, perceived as rich guys coming to Canada doing this. And I guess she believed that she should make a decision for the local people. So unfortunately, she was wrong in every sense of the law. Mm-hmm. We had a contract. The $7 million was given to them as reliance damages, meaning the investment they made into the building. The list clearly says that anything which is built into the building automatically, immediately becomes the property of the building, the ownership. She completely ignored that. Okay. The people supposedly who we never hired, never trained, never paid them were the employees of that entity. She also rewarded them $2 million based on which probably they will not get it because very few of them can actually show that they suffered any damages. But the bottom line is, yes, it was close to $10 million. And unfortunately, we are law-abiding citizens. And even though we appealed, the appeals court ignored everything again, didn't even hear the case properly. They simply dismissed it. I applied to the Supreme Court of Canada. They refused to hear it. So obviously, we have paid and we are paying the $10 million.
To finish on a lighter note, you said earlier to now defunct Népszabadság that you always answer your phone, even when you're on holidays, because you're an immigrant. So even though you made a huge career, you really developed the American dream, you still have this neurosis that you might visit one day. Yes? Do you still have it?
I do. And I think that's why I continue to work hard. I treat the people I work with very carefully because I believe that the business depends on the people who work in the business, in the hotel. The way I treat the people, that's how they treat the clientele. And to me, it's extremely important that I make them feel good about who they are and we give them all the respect they deserve. And that's how they turn around and continue to treat our customers. But the fear factor, look, I always joke around and I tell other people, never fear anyone, never be intimidated, okay, never be impressed, but you should always respect and admire people. But the sense of having fear, leave that privilege to others. However, as far being in business and investing a lot of money, I always have that fear factor because I believe that our business, the hotel business, is a continuous production. Something could always go wrong. The pipe may burst, okay? There could be a fire, could be anything. Could be some unexpected circumstances, okay? Building next door may have a problem. They shut down the street. So my policy is that everyone in the hotel, from a busboy to general manager, have access to my cell phone. And I guess I just need to like to be informed. And I want every single person who I work with understand if they have any situation where they may be mistreated by someone who they work for directly. They have an opportunity to come to me, and their boss also has the understanding that the buck doesn't stop with them, that every person has an opportunity to present their case, and I have an opportunity to be helpful, whoever may be right or wrong. So that's one of the main reasons why my phone number is out there, but also because, unfortunately, even being in America and have these great relationships, one thing I haven't learned, and I didn't go to the best colleges, where you create relationships with families. I haven't learned to use other people's money for investments. I always do it with my money. And that's the risk factor and the fear which drives me, because it's not other people's money which is at risk, but it's my money. And unfortunately, that's the lack of me being educated in America, creating those relationships with a lot of wealthy families, who actually I worked for. But it's one thing to go to college, to the best colleges with people and creating those friendships. And that's an opportunity or the privilege I didn't have. If I had that, maybe I'd be much more relaxed about, doing business with other people's money. Unfortunately, that's one thing I didn't manage very well. So it's what I do is I finance, I build, and I manage. And obviously I own. And there's very few people who do that. And I guess if I grew up in America and went to college there, maybe things would be different. I'd be working with the Goldman Sachs people and Morgan Stanley and all those big companies. But there's also a fear factor with those people because you can finance through others or these institutional funding. But the risk there is that you sign a piece of paper, a contract, and they put up the money, they finance. But the small print, when you sign the document, you make certain missteps that can very easily kill you, and you can pretty much lose it all. So maybe that's the best way for me to describe the fear factor. I continuously have not to get involved with the big boys and the big institutional funds. I like to be in control. But that's also a risk factor because it's your money at risk and your life. And it's really, the word is really an entrepreneur who risks it all to gain a lot. But there's also a factor to lose a great deal.
Well, Mr. Kallan, first of all, happy birthday to your hotel. We wish many more for this.
Thank you very much. Very kind.
And thank you very much for talking to us.
No, very kind. And thank you for the opportunity. I hope if not next year, when we have the 10-year anniversary, I look forward to seeing you back.
We also look forward to it.
Thank you.